Greetings, colleagues. Welcome to the Ivory Attic. I'm Ian Escherwood.
And I'm Kurt and R.C.
And we are here doing something rather unique, I think. Kurt, this is the second year we've done something like this. Why don't you tell us what we're doing?
Yeah, well, so what? Again, if you've listened to these in order, you've probably just listened to a nice episode where we brought all of our much smarter friends together to say insightful things that hopefully have provided some sort of comfort or some sort of charge for you and ways to go forward for the next, for at least the foreseeable future. But maybe it just didn't work. And if it didn't, we have a plan B. And Ian, what's the plan B?
Whiskey.
It's always whiskey. and so we this is the whiskey episode. Listen, so we were actually, and the hilarious thing is, we were originally going to make this. So the whole idea is, if the previous thing doesn't work, the hope is that maybe a nice appreciation of some whiskey and a draft or two can actually help you get, or maybe enhance, let's say, some of the wisdom that that our friends have been laying down, and together help you get through these times. I will say, we originally thought this would just be one episode, but we both found that our friends are have much more interesting and much more to say than we thought they would originally. And we found out that R.C. and I like talking about whiskey a lot more than we thought we were going to. And so it made more sense to break it into two episodes. So this is the one, if you're like, you know what I could really go for is listening for an hour to two people talking about whiskey, then this is the episode for you. And my recommendation is to pull up a finger or two of your favorite if you have one already, and follow along. It's like almost like Reading Rainbow. Is that how Reading Rainbow worked?
Exactly how it works, as I remember it as a child. So saddle up, go to your decanter, get yourself a couple fingers of whatever your favorite tipple is, and enjoy this episode.
Hi, welcome back. We're back at the Ivory Attic. Actually, we're not at the Ivory Attic because Ian won't let us into the attic while he's away. And so I am here in my dining room with R.C. Meissler. He is the Digital Initiatives Librarian at Gettysburg College, and we are going to ask him nothing that has anything to do with that. Instead, he is a fellow whiskey lover and someone who is one of the few people I know who has a better whiskey collection than I do. And so we are going to work through some of the important ways that you can enjoy yourself. And maybe help yourself through some of these hard times with some delicious whiskey. Welcome, R.C.
Thanks, Kurt, for that very generous introduction, although I am not entirely sure what you were implying.
Yeah, well, it's good. Hey, listen, I always say, every time people give me a hard time for having a really large bar, I always say, listen, that means I haven't drank it yet. So it's the people with no whiskey that have already drank all theirs. So that's what I always say.
Yeah, you can't trust them.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's I never do, and that's why I don't go to their houses. All right, well, cool. Well, so R.C., we have a bunch of whiskeys in front of us. So we'll see how this podcast goes. I will say, actually, this is it's going to be the first time. We tend to try to cut off the episodes pretty quickly after we start drinking normally in the Iraq. So I am really curious to see how this is going to go this time, as I have to sustain some level of cohesiveness as I continue to talk. Yeah.
I'm game.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds perfect. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, so all right. So what can we let's look at what we have in front of us. So we have a few different things. So we have some, it looks like we have some bourbon, possibly some Irish whiskey, some single malt Scotch whiskey, some rye. So before we get into kind of all the different kinds, let's just talk a little bit like how do we actually get the whiskey in the first place? Do you have any idea about this?
Well, there's apparently some farm stuff that happens with it.
Well, no, we're not going to talk about any of that stuff. Yeah. Okay. So we're not going. Yeah, we don't need to go back to how grains are grown or like the fact that we developed cereal at some point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So we take grain. Depending on the type we're trying to make, have different what they call mash bills, where we have different varieties of grain. Certain bourbons more than 50% corn, something like that. Yep. Some, single malt has to be just one grain, usually barley.
Yep.
And just the way that the grain is then it's malted, so it's allowed to kind of sprout a little bit.
Yep.
And from there, it is often roasted. It's sometimes and it's cooked in this giant mash thing, and from there, it is distilled with some yeast into liquor.
Right. Yeah, and that's the crazy thing that I find really funny about this is that like the thing I like the one thing I like about whiskey is that we actually create beer out of it first, like really bad beer because we don't put any hops or anything like that in it, and then we're like, and at some point someone in the beer making process said, hey, beer is cool, but it has too much water in it now, and it doesn't get us drunk fast enough. And so, like they said, what if we can boil all this stuff off and just get the good stuff out? And then the color, right, like comes from the actual. This is one thing I used to get into big arguments, right, with a friend of mine about this person had I'm not going to get into this specific one, had a specific food intolerance. And always said, well, and that's why I don't drink brown liquor. And I said, well, listen, the reason it's brown is just because they put it inside of a cask and let it sit. It has nothing to do with the grains that's coming out of this. Like you put vodka in a cask, it'll turn brown.
Exactly.
And that's of course, how you get these beautiful, different colors and everything. But looks like we got some like yellowish, tannish ones, everything to kind of, some relatively darker, brown ones.
And it's, part of that process too is the kind of the cool thing is that, it's chemistry.
Yeah.
And, I'm no chemist, but
that's right. We don't let them on the show.
Exactly.
So,
but, bourbon is oak barrels that have been torched. So like it's that extra sort of like, when the alcohol moves, gets put into the barrel, it kind of goes in and out of the barrel. It brings some of those flavors from the torching from the that back into it.
Yeah.
And then you have our friends across the ocean who often take these barrels after they've been used and then put their own alcohol into it.
Right, which I love. I love the idea that like it is so funny to me that everyone has different ways of doing it, and the only thing they all agree on is that we're going to be really particular about this. So, exactly. like bourbon is like, okay, we're going to have, they have to have these virgin barrels, right, that have never been used with anything else. And almost all of the, the Scotch whiskeys, right, they're like, the one thing we can't have is a brand new barrel.
Exactly.
Something else has to have gone into it at some point. Like, we don't care what it is. We'll use all kinds of different stuff. But that's awesome.
And, part of that too is that, I've, the distillery tours I've been in have been also really cool because you definitely learn how where the barrel after the plain alcohol is put into it, of how the humidity, the environment, even how far up it is in these vast barns, where the barn is, how much humidity was there, the temperature differences, all really, it's wild to think that, every single barrel of, whiskey that has ever been produced is totally different.
Right. No, it's crazy.
Of course, the industry decides, well, we just need to cater to the lowest common denominator and make it as plain and homogeneous as possible. But it's a really cool science in the fact that you're taking something that has a ton of variables and trying to do something consistent.
Right. That's what. And I am always amazed by this because, for instance, one of our bottles here that we have here is a Four Roses, and that's one that I drink pretty consistently. And I mean, you can drink this, a bottle of Four Roses for years on end, and you put them next to each other, they're basically going to taste the same.
Yep.
Despite the fact that there are so many different ways that things could go horribly wrong or horribly, not even wrong, but just different to make it taste completely different. Like, yeah. I also find it interesting that that just the time frame for this. I think one thing that I loved whenever, especially when we were doing, I've done a couple of Scotch whiskey, like up in Scotland, some actual tours, and a lot of the a lot of the at least at the time, like people weren't selling anything that was less than a 10-year-old bottle. Which means that's the youngest, the youngest year, and the idea of like in an economy that generally rewards on the 3-month time frame, the idea of having to think 10 years ahead of time of like how much production we're going to need, like how much of this stuff, like it's just insane to me. Like I find like it's crazy, and
just that we put but. And to the flip side of that, though, is that, our, capitalism has essentially, decreed that, the longer something has stayed in a barrel, obviously the better it is.
Sure. Right.
And therefore the more expensive. And of course, if it sat in a barn for a decade or more, then that's taken up space that they could have used.
Yeah, that they could have used for other.
Exactly. Right. So it makes a lot of sense. But the current whiskey bourbon market is really insane. We could talk about that more.
Yeah. No, but that's the thing, right? So it's based on basically how hard it was for them to make, not necessarily the best one that's out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you add the premium of I have this bottle of 15-year aged bourbon. And, I spent $1,000 on it. It's like, well, how does it taste? Like, I don't know. I've never opened it.
Right.
It's there to drink.
Right, exactly. There's one purpose to this product.
It doesn't work if it's not going down your throat.
That's exactly it. That's a perfect segue, I think, to the fact that we should get at least some going down our throat. Do you have a what do you want?
Phrasing, Kurt.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. do you want, man, just a side note, actually, my wife and I have been rewatching the entire Archer series.
Nice.
And I would just say, and I don't care, this is super narrow casting to anyone who's watched Archer, but man, if you were anything like me, it hits so good even the second time around. Anyway, do you have a so what do you want to start? Do you have a thought?
So one thing that I appreciate is sort of the figuring out the entry levels, and it's like, where can you get in on the ground floor?
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially if you've never had bourbon or whiskey, or you've had a bottle of Four Queens in college, right. And you're really not on that anymore. What's the reset button? What's the start? And I think the Four Roses is definitely a great entry level.
Yeah, it's great. And so we're in Pennsylvania right now. What at the state store? What that's running like 25 maybe.
Yeah, something like that. It's very reasonable.
Not bad. All right, well, cool. Let's take a little taste, see what we think. You want to do this on ice, or do you want to do it straight? What are we thinking?
I think let's do it on ice.
Yeah, because that's how I normally drink. I normally drink it with like maybe one piece of ice. Okay, all right.
There's definitely some people think it's the cold, inhibits your taste buds with it, but I enjoy a little bit of it, especially if they let it water down just a little bit.
Right, exactly. Well, and and I always point out to people. I'm doing a small pour because we have. I'm just looking at the number of bottles that we have here. I always point out to people. I once had and hopefully this person isn't listening. But I once had a strong argument because I was doing a gin tasting with a group of people, and the argument that they made is they said, "Listen, we have to drink them warm so that we can taste like all the different flavors and everything." And I said, "I will never, outside of this tasting, voluntarily drink warm gin in my life. Like, no one sits around, well, not nobody, but people generally do not sit around to drink warm whiskey or warm gin." And so I said, why am I tasting this in a way that I'm not actually going to drink it?
Yeah. Always keep the bottle in your freezer.
No, exactly. All right. Well, cheers.
Salute.
Still nice. No. So what are you tasting?
bourbon.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the thing, yeah. So, it is nice how it kind of develops as it goes through. So, I mean, the nice thing about Four Roses, I always get that. I like having that. At least for me, for a good bourbon, I like having a decently strong sweet note hit me right at the front, which I kind of like. Like I like to actually get that sweetness. I find when I don't do that, and to me, like that's a big difference between bourbon and some of the other whiskeys that you get, is that you get kind of this, and I think it's what it's from, it's vanillin, I think, that comes from the barrels, right? Like that comes from that, which is related to vanilla. It's artificial vanilla. But
so this definitely has a very good kind of a very sweet note at the beginning. The heat sort of like gets the side of your tongue pretty quick. The finish, it's a little like kind of dissipates kind of quick.
Right. So that's what I was just noticing.
It doesn't linger very long,
right.
Which, if you are just wanting something that you don't have to think about
right, exactly.
Four Roses is, and if anyone from Four Roses is listening, you make a wonderful product.
You do make a wonderful product, and I should point this out right now. Anyone in the whiskey industry who is listening about this and would like to sponsor this podcast, we would welcome any sponsorship, and we will willingly drink one of your products on podcast. I think I can speak for Ian right now. He's not here, but drink one of your products on air before every podcast and talk about it. Like, we have no problem with that if you start sponsoring us. So please feel free to do that.
I will say it's overall, it's not super complex. It's not super spicy or hot or anything, but it's solid and it's good, especially in mixed drinks if you don't want the bourbon to sort of overpower,
to go flying through it,
everything else.
Absolutely. When this and one thing again for those of you who aren't for people who aren't necessarily used to drinking these type of things, one kind of funny thing about this that like is generally different than things like vodka and stuff like that is that people will bottle bourbons at different strengths. So this is a pretty standard. It's a 40%, so also known as 80 proof, because proof is generally approximately twice the percentage of alcohol. And so so that's basically the bottom end of your of what you'll have as far as how much alcohol they have. And some of these that we drink, I think, as I'm looking at them, have slightly higher ones, which will give some more heat sometimes, especially if they're not aged as much. Yeah,
and one of the things to consider, especially with proof or alcohol percentage, is alcohol is a solvent, and it is really good at pulling out certain flavors.
Right.
So when people ask, why, I really enjoy cask strength bourbons and whiskeys, and it's not to get me drunk faster, it's because it pulls out a lot more flavor and it's not diluted as much, because that's the other aspect to keep in mind, is that when these are dumped out of the barrels, they add water to essentially get it to the level of alcohol desired.
Right. Yeah. Which is why you'll see sometimes like some will be labeled as cask strength. And of course those are often not necessarily, I mean, you can do it sometimes, but not necessarily meant to be drank at that specific, because they can be quite strong depending on how they are.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah. I don't want to judge. I mean, listen, you can definitely do. Definitely. All right. So what do we think? What would we like to? I think maybe let's stick on bourbon for now, so we can talk about that. So do we have anything else we want to see? Maybe move up a little.
Let's do the Meissler. Is there a age statement on that?
Yeah. So here now. So what we're looking at next is the Meisslers. Is that how it's pronounced? I don't know. Okay. It's a small batch. Kentucky straight bourbon. This one has it is 45.7% alcohol, so a little higher proof. As far as the aging, it was established in 1753, but I don't think it's been aging since then. No, they don't tell you anything about this. So one thing that's interesting about these different is that, so again, all of these have to be aged. I think Kentucky, whenever you see anything that says straight bourbon or Kentucky straight, they have to be a minimum of 2 years from what I remember is how long they have to be aged. So anytime you see that, that's part of what you're paying for again, is that 2 years. So let's see how this one comes out. I mean, it's definitely different.
Yeah. It's not as in your face with the sweetness. It's almost more rounded out to begin with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too with these things, again, I think unlike a Coke or something like that you're going to drink. I mean, obviously you need to drink these a lot slower. One of the kind of fun things about this, it's to some extent like wine. You can kind of feel different moments as you're drinking it. Of course, those become less noticeable as you get further along in the drinking process. But I think this one definitely doesn't come on quite as quickly with the sweetness, and it's kind of there's a weird almost fruitiness in the middle.
Yeah, despite it being a higher proof, it doesn't have the same alcohol harshness.
Yeah, it doesn't bite you as much. Yeah, no, and that's one thing that's interesting is, I think you had mentioned before, like how long this age. I think it's very likely this one. I mean, a lot of times you can kind of tell the age, at least to a certain extent, just by the color. Yeah, and just looking at the color of this one compared to the bottle of the nearly full bottle of Four Roses that I have, it's definitely darker. And so it's definitely there's definitely been some amount of extra aging, or they've hit the barrel with some extra stuff,
some extra caramel.
Exactly. One thing that's funny. My brother-in-law actually the other day brought me a. Again, one of the things that people are like, as you can imagine, we live in a society where if you can make the same product with a lot less time, you get a lot more money. There are a bunch of these companies. He brought me a bourbon from one of these where they're trying to speed up this aging process. And this one had actually taken barrels, charred them all, chopped them into tiny little pieces, threw them into the whiskey, and put the whole thing in a stainless steel pressure system. And then basically pressurizes it.
Wow.
Just shove all the whiskey inside of the wood. Then they depressurize it. And it all comes back out. And they do this a bunch of times. And so it's aged, I think, for like 10 minutes or something like that. And gets a similar amount of color. I will say, I don't have to worry about losing a sponsorship because I don't remember the name of this place. We're not drinking it right now. But I will say on the positive side, it did taste like bourbon. Like it was identifiable as bourbon. It was not an enjoyable bourbon, but it was identifiable as bourbon. Yeah.
Yeah. Maker's Mark does something similar, but with the traditional process of they putting like French oak staves into the barrels.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
To add like a little extra bit of oakiness.
Oh, cool.
It. And it's not my cup of tea. I think it amplifies the oak a little bit.
Yeah. It almost becomes too much.
But it's good. Yeah. There's also Jefferson's their Aged at Sea series. Which is a fantastic gimmick. That
it's an awesome gimmick.
You take a bunch of bourbon and you put it into
put on a boat
essentially on like a container on a container ship.
No. I'm sure it's a bunch of guys sailing, like singing sea shanties as they go along.
I'm the captain now. No, but it's and the whole thing is depending on where the boat sails. Like it's its path, how long it's been out, but also how rough the seas are. They try to like put it forward as being like, the extra pressure and movement can potentially like add to. It's like, if you put like, bourbon, like what you're talking about, put in like a paint shaker and see what happens, like a barrel in a paint shaker and see what happens.
I want to make, I think, listen, and I'm going to say this now, and listen, this is on the podcast. I was going to like, listen, R.C., this is going to be our $1 million that we make. Like what we're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of barrels of whiskey. We're going to throw them on just a crappy, like Mack truck and drive them around New York. All right. And all the hipsters in Brooklyn are going to buy it. It's going to be great. They'll say like, you can taste the flavors of New York. Like it's going to be really good.
Uncle Kurt's Country Roads.
I really like this. This sounds perfect. All right, good. All right. I think we have the most number. Do we have one more bourbon? Is that right?
So this is one of my favorites.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, what do we got this?
This is the Penelope Toasted. And this is 100 proof.
Ooh, okay, all right.
And there's no age statement on... Nope, it is age statement. It's 5 years, age for 5 years.
Okay, all right, okay.
This one is batch 23306.
Wow.
Another marketing gimmick if you ever want to see, if you see a batch number... It's the idea that, this is sort of like the serial number.
Right.
Again, it's all a marketing gimmick. It's sort of like tasting notes, but
it shows they can count at least.
Yes, it does. This is what the toasted barrel whiskeys are after it is. As my understanding of it is that after it is gone through the traditional bourbon process, they take it out of the first barrel and put it into a fresh toasted barrel.
Oh, wow.
So it gets like a double hit. It's like after the alcohol has, absorbed essentially all it can get out of the existing barrel, they put it in a new barrel.
Cool.
So it gets like an extra hit.
Okay. All right. Penelope Toasted. All right. So let's see what that's like.
And it gives a nice extra hit of kind of those roasty flavors that we tend to like in bourbon.
One of the things that actually drives me nuts about it is I feel like, because this looks quite a bit darker, but it's also a little hard to tell because the bottle is narrower than the other bottle. And I'm always like, I kind of want, can we just standardize the size, the width of the bottle so I can just tell how good your bourbon is by looking at it? Yeah. Cheers. Oh, that's quite nice. I will say, though, it's funny going from the Four Roses to the Mixtures to the Penelope. The Mixtures was definitely the lowest in the alcohol. Even though it was a little higher, I felt like it didn't taste as much alcohol as the Four Roses. The Penelope, now that it's up to 100 proof, so 50%, it's coming back a little bit again. I can get it. Yeah,
it's coming back with a vengeance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But as I was saying, the idea, one of the interesting things I think about the marketing of this stuff is you go to the state, you go to Pennsylvania, Fine Wines and Good Spirits, and they'll have these little placards. It's like tasting notes, and it's going to, tobacco, vanilla, baking spice, socks.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I know there
dirt.
I know there are people who are, have super palates and their whole job is to taste things and to pull out the different elements of it. And that's probably one of the things that confused me the most when I was starting to get into bourbon was actually tasting notes, because I would get a bottle. It's like, this sounds delicious. And I get it home. It's like, this doesn't taste like this.
It's like any of this. There's no chocolate flavor in
this.
What
are you
talking about? It tastes like...
This is a lie. And it gives you, I think, a flavor profile of if it's going to be a darker flavor, something that's going to be a little heavier, or if it's going to be lighter, like honey. If you see honey, it's like, oh, this is probably going to be a little sweeter.
Right.
If it's tobacco, it's probably going to be a little bit more bitter, probably a little bit more tannin-y.
Yeah.
It's going to hit your tongue. It's going to dry you out a little bit.
Right.
On your tongue a little bit more. But tasting notes are... Yeah, they're BS, I think, for the most part.
Well, I know, and they always drive me nuts too. And you're right, because I feel like they also, one of the things that I find frustrating about it is that I think when I'm drinking this, right, it is a unique flavor that is very hard to map onto any other flavor.
Yes.
And so I'd rather actually talk about things like, oh, like that's, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like there are times with some of these, like I think the second one that we had, I mean, definitely has like some sort of weird, it reminds me of fruitiness.
Yes.
Like, and so like, you're like, okay, like that's something I can wrap my head around. But like, I'm not going to sit there and say it tastes like strawberries or raspberries.
Yes.
It just has like, it's something weird about it that kind of reminds me of fruit a little bit. Like,
this tastes like organic figs from,
yeah, no, exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
wherever.
From Western Morocco. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it definitely can be a entry point if you're trying to get into this stuff beyond just like the standard bottle that you grab off the shelf when your in-laws are around.
Exactly. Which is going to be really important. We're recording this right before Thanksgiving, so this will be happening multiple times. I will say in my house, in my household, and around. Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind. It's probably not going to taste like that, but you can at least get an idea.
Get rough ideas of where it is. One, and this, I will say, this is it's funny because I drink let's say pretentious enough coffee right now that like all my coffee has tasting notes on it, and I
my opinion of you.
I know. Exactly. RC's about to walk out. So just a second, everyone. I'm going to have to grab him and bring him back. Okay. All right. So I convinced him to come back. But it's funny because like I don't taste any of those things, but I do know that anytime I see something that says it's going to be fruity, I'm not going to actually like it. Like I don't like whatever those things are.
that that is true. I definitely the fruity label often goes with more acidic.
Right, no, exactly. It normally means it's much more acidic.
Right.
Exactly. I don't like any of those words. Like
it's like I want motor oil on the brain.
All right, cool. Well, let's shift a little bit. I think the most logical one is probably to move. Do you want to move over a little laterally over to the rye that we have? We just have one rye.
Yeah,
Does
sure.
that make sense?
Yeah.
We have a pretty again like I would say an approachable rye. This is Old Overholt. This is the Old Overholt's the one that has two versions, right? I think they have a bonded and then non-bonded. Yes. So again, if you're starting, let me just say this: if you're listening to this and you're like, "Boy, I'm learning a lot," my recommendation is don't get the bonded. So the idea of the bonded is it's at a much higher proof, much higher alcohol content. The non-bonded one is coming in at 43%. So again, 86 proof.
I will say that some bottled in bond comes in at a lot cheaper. But it still has a good quality to
absolutely.
it. So
for the record, I actually really like Old Overholts. I mostly use it for mixing cocktails because one of the nice things about some of the higher proof ones is that you can put it comes through with a little bit more assertion than some of your lower ones. So rye, if I remember correctly, you're gonna have to correct me. I think rye, 50% of the mash bill has to be rye, if I remember correctly.
That sounds right.
Does that sound right? I think, so again, instead of using kind of these other grains, corn, things like that, you explicitly have to have 50% of it to be rye.
51%.
51%. I was really close. So no, that's right.
Close enough for.
I was going to say.
Close enough for
we'll have Ian weigh in later about whether or not I passed the quiz. Yeah. All right, let's taste it. That actually is smoother than I thought it would be, for a rye. A lot of times the ryes tend to have they're a lot bitier, I would say, is
spicy.
Spicy is a much better term. And this one doesn't have, it does have, I feel like sometimes, especially with the ryes, they definitely have, I don't know what to call it, like, I want to say like, this is going to sound dumb, but I'm going to say like every once in a while. So my kids really like farro, and every once in a while I just put a raw piece of farro in my mouth, just to see kind of what that experience is like. Kind of crunch it up. That's kind of what it's kind of like the rye always tastes a little bit like chewing on a piece of wheat or something like that. Like it has that kind of like unbaked bread almost, like, you know, like
earthiness or rawness to it.
Yeah. I like it. I have to be in the mood for it, I'll be honest. So.
You know, I enjoy rye. Knob Creek makes a really good rye. It's aged like 9 years. So the Redemption rye is actually pretty good. I'm not a big fan of the Redemption bourbon, but I do like the
but the rye is
the rye is really nice.
Excellent.
I'm actually someone who prefers cocktails that are traditionally done with rye. I still tend to like them made with bourbon.
So it's like a Manhattan basically. Because Manhattan traditionally, I think, is supposed to be rye. I often use bourbon as well. Again, if I'm being a traditionalist and trying to show off, like I'll use rye and then tell everyone that I'm doing it. But yeah, I think if I'm at home and no one's looking, it's almost always bourbon.
That's fair.
By the way, this is a aged 4 years, so it is a little it does have a little bit of an older age. So that's kind of interesting. All right, we're out of. Oh, sorry, please.
So, and also don't mix this up with Canadian rye.
Oh, thank you very much.
Totally different thing.
Which I think is the one. Is that the one that they're talking about? Which one? All right, here's so R.C. didn't know about this. This is a random quiz question. He's going to guess it, and then we're going to look it up and see what it is. All right, in the song "American Pie," it says drinking whiskey and rye. Which one do you think it is referring to? Canadian whiskey or American? Is Canadian rye or American rye?
I would have to say, based off the age of the song, Canadian.
That's what I would guess too. I would guess Canadian rye. All right. We'll see if that's. We'll see if RC is right. All right. Well, so we've had a brief pause. So RC in the first ever Ivory Attic pop quiz. This is why we don't do them. I actually don't know the answer. We looked it up. We spent about 10 minutes looking this up. It turns out that
no one knows.
No one knows.
So I think this is a fantastic opportunity for any burgeoning humanities.
I was going to say, this is a PhD.
Students, PhD. If you're looking for a journal article, as overplayed and overly sentimental as American Pie is as a song, this is a unique slice of culture that needs to be addressed.
It's important. It's really important. We need to know what they're talking about. We need to know, because these are very different products. Again, the difference between Canadian rye and American rye is quite different. Excellent. Well, so look at that. Helping people out. All right. All right. Let's do again. We're kind of going in order that bourbon, American rye, relatively similar with slightly different mash bills. I want us to go in a slightly different direction. And I'm doing this partially because this is the whiskey that my co-host Ian Isherwood always gives me whenever he gets sentimental and thinking about his heritage. This is Bushmills original Irish whiskey. This is the white label. And you're going to want that on at least one piece of ice.
Exactly.
Now, RC, how frequently have you had this? This is an interesting question.
I will say that I have a very nostalgic relationship with Bushmills, the brand, because not the white, but the Bushmills 16 was one of the first premium Irish whiskeys I ever had, and it was going from 0 to 100.
Sure. Yeah. That was it. You're I'm never going to redo this.
It was essentially we were at a restaurant or a bar or something with some friends, and someone, we were chatting about what was on the menu, and someone had said, "Oh, Bushmill 16." It's like, you might like this, and I had no idea what it was. I knew it was like really expensive, but it's like, you know what? I'll give this a shot.
Let's try it. Yeah.
It was a big. It was one of the bottles that made it from when we moved to Indiana to Gettysburg. When I got this job. It was one of those bottles that I had just sort of like sipped on maybe a couple of times a year.
Oh, excellent.
But I have had the Bushmills White Label, and it is serviceable.
Yeah, let's taste and see what we think. Ooh, that is, I will say, can I just recommend to people, if you're doing this same tasting, this is the wrong order.
Yes.
That is, I have had this before. I've enjoyed it. That is a rough transition. Let's just say
time for a palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. We
should have had a pretzel.
I was gonna say we have pretzels and water as palate cleansers that we're muting as we hopefully as so you don't have to hear too much crunching.
This is where I think you see the tasty note as being honey and fruit.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's sweeter. It's got a little bit of acidic, like that kind of hit to it.
Yeah.
But then it really doesn't taste like anything after that.
Right. And this is I think from what I understand, and we'll just edit this out and then put in the right thing if I'm wrong. But from what I understand, Irish whiskey, I think largely, and we'll talk about single malt and Scotch whiskey in a second, I think largely follows the same process where it's largely barley that's been malted and then kilns. But and then it's also aged in casks that have already been used. But the kind of the main difference between this and let's say single malt is that they're doing a bunch of different stuff and mixing it all together.
Yes.
And so they're doing all kinds of different things. They're mixing together, make sure it always tastes the same thing. This, by the way, it says in the back that it's seasoned in bourbon barrels and Oloroso sherry casks. And actually, that sherry is probably part of what's getting that kind of lightness and different flavors to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that kind of confused me when I was first starting to get into this stuff too, was, straight, blended, trying to, what was the difference?
Right.
And this idea that, there in some, for a while it was, blended was the cheap stuff.
Right. Exactly.
It was the things that, it's leftovers. It was, we're just trying to make something that tasted consistent.
Right.
But now you can get really interesting blended stuff because you have distillers who are actually trying new things.
Right.
And it's not just the dregs or the stuff that is, mass produced. They're really trying to do something interesting. I don't know if you've heard of the High West Distillery. They're based in Utah.
Okay.
Of all places, Utah. But they do a very nice blended American whiskey that is very good.
Okay.
And they do it very intentionally.
Yeah.
Like the blend they do is very intentional. It's designed to hit a very specific flavor profile, but it's much more akin to, I think, bourbon.
Okay.
Than something from Ireland or Scotland.
All right. We're gonna I think the last thing. Well, at least the last in our kind of, let's say, normal. Because I see you brought some bizarre things for me. But I think let's go to single malt. And just talk about that for a second. So what we've got here is actually, I had to. This actually took a while because I had to figure out. I have a decanter that had something in it. I knew it was Scotch. I had no idea what it was. Luckily, I keep the because I'm me. I cut out the actual the box and put it at the bottom so that I knew what it was. This is Tamnavoul and this is Speyside. All right, so with Scotch whiskeys, again. A slightly different process behind these, right? So what we're doing with these is that we're When we've got the malt, we let it malt, and then when we roast it, depending on where we are, we're using some amount of peat that we're burning because we're in Scotland and we've killed all the trees.
Yes.
and so we're using the peat to actually to roast this, and it creates a very interesting flavor to it.
Yes.
That has some smokiness to it sometimes. Some very very helpfully described peatiness to it.
Yes.
Which means nothing until you figured it out.
So one of the fun things about Scotch, especially the ones that tend to be farther north, I think, the peat content tends to get higher.
Oh, it gets crazy.
And you get into tasting notes like Band-Aids and iodine and
jet fuel.
Yes. And there are people who question your sanity when you say, "Oh, yeah, this has a very Band-Aidy flavor to it." It's like, "Do you enjoy this?" And it's like, "Yes, actually, I do."
Something to it. Exactly. And this one, it's a double cask. It was first matured in. Again, one of the interesting things about Scotch whiskey is that it's always matured in a barrel that has had something else in it. And so this was matured first in American oak barrels, and then sherry cask finish, they say. So let's see what this tastes like. By the way, with Scotch, we're gonna drink this a little differently, which is that traditionally you don't really ice Scotch. I mean, I'm sure people do and can, but traditionally, right, where I think we're just gonna add a little bit of water to it to get some of the flavors out and some of the aromas out, things like that. Yeah,
there's this fun thing that you start to see, like the different, like I think they're the esters. Those start to coagulate at the top.
You actually see a little cloudiness inside of it. Yeah, no, I love that.
It's a fun transformation, so it's fun to watch as well as drink.
Which is, I will say, I think is really important. I think all good drinks should be all good drinks that you have with friends, slowly drinking as you contemplate life, should all be interesting, because at some point, listen, friends, we all run out of things to say, and at some point, you just have to sit there with your friend and look into your drink and contemplate life for a second. It better be an interesting drink, because if it looks terrible, that's the end of the night. All right.
I mean, you're already staring into the void.
Right, no, exactly.
Or you're waiting for the turkey to come out of the oven and questioning all of your life decisions up to that point.
Right, exactly. Waiting for your in-laws to stop speaking. Excellent. So that was the Tamnavulin. I also have a Balvenie Doublewood. This is one of my favorite whiskeys. It used to be incredibly affordable. It is now completely unaffordable. And I think this, at least in the state store, is running, I think, $80 a bottle. I happened upon a random sale in Arizona where they were selling this for $30 a bottle. And the only reason I don't have 20 of them sitting right here right now is because I couldn't figure out how to get it on the plane. Mm-hmm. And this is a shortcoming of me. I felt bad about stuffing 4 bottles in my kids' bags.
You should never feel bad about
that. And so I didn't do it, which was, I think in retrospect, a mistake.
That's just creative. That's just creative thinking. It's innovation. It's innovation.
That's exactly right.
It's innovation.
It's an innovative thing. All right. So that's the Balvenie Doublewood. It's aged 12 years, which means the youngest whiskey in this has been aged 12 years. They're allowed to add other stuff if they want to, but all of it has to be at least 12 years or older. I love that whiskey.
Oh, that's nice.
The Doublewood, this also one has been put into 2 casks. This they have it's actually really funny the way they talk about this. they have they tell you very distinctively that its complex yet rich and smooth taste comes from its maturation in, and this is in italics, 2 different types of oak cask. They do not explain to you how they're different, why they're different, or what that does. But
it's good marketing.
It's really good marketing. It's an absolutely delicious.
This is nice.
Yeah.
It has a bit of the smoke from the peat. It's got some sweetness to it.
Yeah.
It's not overpowering. It doesn't hit you with a ton of the alcohol.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's not overwhelming you
either.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and these all they tend to bottle these at, I think, yes, this is 43%.
What region is this from?
This is from Balvenie.
Yeah, I don't know it. This is where the Scots totally start confusing me, because so many of these are just named after the region.
Okay, this is important. Actually, I just found out while I was looking for it. It's the second the first cask is an oak cask that had whiskey in it. The second cask is an oak sherry cask, a European oak sherry cask.
Okay.
Anyway,
Sure.
I have no idea. We will look up where it's from, and I'll edit that in, or not, depending on how lazy I'm being. So RC, actually, you probably don't know this because you're not as well traveled as I am, but the Balvenie is a distillery. It's a Speyside distillery, which I think most of our
This is why you have a librarian on the show, Kurt, because I can use Google, and that is most of my job.
Yeah, I'm gonna edit out all of that pausing and just the part where I sound really smart. Okay, let's move to a different whiskey. Let's move. You have brought a very special treat for me. Can we have it now?
This is the Lagavulin, but it is not the 16-year Lagavulin that some of you may be aware of. This is one of the Nick Offerman editions. Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec himself has overseen the creation of a line of scotch at the Lagavulin distillery. And these are aged for 11 years. And this is the 4th, I think, edition. He's been releasing one into the wild pretty much once a year for the last 4 years. And this one is the most recent edition, which is aged in Caribbean rum casks.
Okay.
So it has a bit of extra sweetness to it. And this is the one scotch that I will drop an ice cube in.
Okay.
Because it does actually benefit.
Wonderful.
From that.
Well, we've got ice cubes here. Let's here, we can even get the clink.
Clink. Yeah, and if you are at all familiar with the exorbitant prices of scotch, Lagavulin is definitely a premium brand, but the Offermans are coming slightly cheaper. They're still expensive, but the variety of these versions is pretty neat. The first one that he did was just pretty much a standard 11-year. There's nothing too unique about it. And then he did I believe it was a Guinness cask finish.
Oh, cool. And
then there was one that was a kind of toasted cask, so it's extra oaky. So there's been a few of these, and they are all very unique in the sense that this is Islay scotch, so they're definitely a little heavier on the peat side of things. But I think in this case, the Caribbean cask finish really mellows that out.
Oh, cool. And what's the approximate price point on this?
This one was $90. So again, not cheap, but a good present.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
for yourself.
Hey, Christmas is coming up, everyone, or any other holidays that you like. So I will just say, I got that up to my nose, and I was like, "Wow, that's going to be smoky." There is definitely a campfire aroma to that.
There's definitely
wonderful.
There's some of that Band-Aid.
There's definitely some of that Band-Aid. But I really like. I was halfway to sipping this, and I was like, "Wow, that's going to be." I like that a lot.
So this is, again, my entry level into Scotch was Lafroig.
Oh yeah,
which if you're not familiar, is probably the most Band-Aidy and
it's intense
and most iodine-y, like salty, like eating a salt tablet while sucking on a Band-Aid sort of approach to drinking liquor.
I used to drink like that used to be my go-to Scotch, mostly because it was one of the actual affordable single malts. Like it used to be. No, I was gonna say it used to be like at the $40 price point, which was about what I was willing to pay. So it's no longer. Yeah,
so Elays are the Elay Scotches are one of my favorites, and it's an acquired taste if you're willing to do it. I would say Ardbeg is probably like the even peatier, but they're Wee Beastie.
Oh yeah, that one's delicious.
And it's like only $50 a bottle for Scotch.
Yeah.
Like that's only $50.
Only $50.
Only $50. It's definitely kind of hits the same sort of notes.
And I would say, I mean, like Scotch is. So I did when I was learning to enjoy Scotch, I definitely did it the wrong way. And that the first Scotch I had was Talisker, which one of the and that is it's an Islay Scotch is again, and for those of you who don't know, it's the Islay versus the Speyside, they're all just talking about the different regions of Scotland. Basically, as you get further north or on islands, they get really, really peaty and if you get further south, they get a little bit more mellow. And I thought, so I tried that. I actually tried it at the distillery itself, and I absolutely hated it. Like I was like, I can't believe people are paying money for this stuff. And a lot of money, like a ton of money for this stuff. And then I had a friend actually tell me about Dalwhinnie, which is, I think, actually an extremely approachable. It doesn't have a ton of that notes. It is nice to drink. It's enjoyable. You put a little bit of water in it. Again, the water brings out some of the nice notes, the fruity notes, things like that. The downside is that again, the problem that we're running into, and I think R.C. can back me up. So R.C. and I are I think probably started our drinking careers at about the same age. Especially the ability to drink something that wasn't, swill drinking age. And the problem is, right when that was happening for us, Scotches had kind of fallen in popularity, and we won't get into the politics of it, but it didn't have any tariffs on them, and were just basically extremely affordable. Yeah. And so we all learned to love all these things. And then approximately 5 years ago, they more than doubled in cost. And so I will say, I personally, it's hard for me to buy a bottle anymore. I have to be really selective in a way that I never used to be.
Well, and I think one thing about the Elays is that you can be very light-handed and get
a big punch
and get a good experience.
I
will say one of my favorite cocktails is a penicillin.
Oh that's a good cocktail. That is a good cocktail,
which is blended Scotch for the base. So I do a honey syrup, but I also infuse the lemon peel directly into the honey syrup, so I don't have to dilute it with more lemon juice.
Yeah,
and then top it off with just a little bit of like a super smoky Elay.
That sounds delicious,
and it's definitely what it'll cure what ails you.
It'll cure what ails you
on a dark winter night.
Which is I think, you know what, actually, RC, I think that's a great place to end it. Listen, the whole point of this, I think we've talked about this at the front end. One should not get in the habit of using alcohol as a crutch necessarily. But listen, these are some tough times. There's some wonderful liquor out there, and sometimes there is something absolutely transcendent about sitting with a nice bottle of Scotch having a nice small draft or 2, 3 sometimes, and realizing that someone has spent an enormous amount of time, often 10, 15 years, putting this thing together, creating something that's really wonderful for us to enjoy, and doing things that humans should be doing. When humans are being good, which is creating wonderful things for each other. And so you put on some nice music, your favorite thing, whether it be some Tom Waits or your favorite, Beethoven symphony. You get yourself a nice scotch. Maybe you sit down with a friend, and you enjoy the fact that humans can do really wonderful things. We can really be nice to each other when we are doing our best, and doing things that are put us in our best places. And so I like to think about that as I have a draft of one of these, and I hope that between the various things that you heard at the beginning of this episode, or maybe the scotch or the bourbon that you have now, that between maybe the two of them, you found some sort of piece to kind of help you through some of the rough times that might be coming ahead from time to time.
Well said, Kurt. And if that doesn't bring you solace, then just pour yourself another.
Absolutely. Well said. That's perfect.